What if we went on a journey to a continent everyone knows, yet remains so mysterious? This continent, you carry it with you every day. It's your skin. In Planet Skin, presented by Codif Technologies Naturelles, we will navigate through the different landscapes of our skin. We will meet the local populations and try to understand their interactions with each other and the outside world. We will dive into the heart of its ecosystem and retrace its history through the ages. My name is Marjorie Murphy, and I will be your guide on this journey created by Cécile Coumeau.
This biotope has a huge advantage. It represents the greatest biodiversity known today.
The great charm of a journey somewhere is the encounter with the local populations, the discovery of their customs. Our journey to Planet Skin is no exception to this rule. So, I suggest getting acquainted with these numerous inhabitants. But since they do not easily let themselves be approached, living hidden in the little-known territories, we have called on two guides, sort of our ethnologists for Planet Skin. Richard Martin, biotechnologist, and Marc Feuillolet, microbiologist and professor at the University of Rouen, Normandy. Here we are again, aboard our small tourist plane flying over Planet Skin. We are at a low enough altitude to observe the natives living on our fleshy surface. To not disturb them, we are equipped with powerful glasses, allowing us to see the infinitely small. So at first glance, what do we distinguish?
There is constantly a sort of aura around us, which is a cloud of bacteria that wander, floating a little bit above the skin.
Richard Martin.
Think of the bacteria as well stacked on the skin. So in the same way that we learned that there are some under the skin, up to 3 millimeters, well, there are also some floating around the skin because we're constantly shedding them as well.
In this sort of cloud live microscopic species, bacteria, viruses, yeasts, and fungi. Overall, these microorganisms measure no more than 1 to 2 micrometers. 1 micrometer is 1,000 times smaller than a millimeter. That's a brief physical presentation. But what do we know about this society called the skin microbiota? How do all the inhabitants of Planet Skin coexist? What are they used for? All these questions are just beginning to be answered. So in terms of population density, the numbers are still approximate, but they are staggering.
On average, let's say we have between 100,000 and 1 million bacteria per square centimeter of skin. That's a good average number. So we host between 1 and 5 times, we're not very sure today, more bacteria than we have human cells.
It is enough for you to scratch your head to shed and lose about 30 inhabitants. Given the number, it's nothing to worry about. Besides, all these microorganisms belong to various families.
The bacterial diversity is as great as human diversity, but on a colossal scale. The skin biotope, which is what we're talking about here, is something extremely diverse. There was a very nice article that came out in the United States titled, "Your Body is a Planet," and you'll easily understand that the tropical forest on your armpit is not at all the same as the landscape of your wrist. It doesn't touch doors, doesn't hold on to subway poles. In short, it doesn't exchange bacteria. So there you have two completely opposite worlds. One is the humid, tropical forest, perhaps even a primary forest, one might say. And then on the other side, you have this forearm, this part next to the palm of the hand. Well, this part is particularly dry, so to speak, compared to all the other parts of the skin. But this biotope has a huge advantage. It represents the greatest biodiversity known today.
Some bacteria thrive in tropical areas, while others proliferate in desert regions. They have their own preferences. And since bacteria continuously adapt to survive, their presence on our skin also varies over time. Over the years, some disappear, others multiply, and still others migrate.
À la naissance, vous êtes For now, we still operate under the hypothesis that at birth, the newborn skin is sterile.
Marc Feuillolet.
This remains debatable because we now know that there might be a vascular microbiota, so it might not be 100% sterile, but let's say roughly sterile. Then, it will all depend on how the baby is born. If the baby is born vaginally, naturally, it will encounter the first microbiota it meets, which will be the vaginal microbiota. And there, the vaginal microbiota is 99% lactobacilli. Lactobacillus crispatus is the main one found in the vaginal area for a normal healthy population. So, what will happen is that the baby will be covered with lactobacilli at birth. If the baby is born by caesarean section, then it will be directly contaminated by the surface microbiota of the mother, and possibly the healthcare workers as well. And at that moment, it will already start to have staph and other microorganisms.
Staphs are the colloquial term for staphylococci. During the first months of life, the cutaneous microbiota is homogeneous. All areas of the skin are populated by the same inhabitants. Between 3 months and throughout the teenage years, the cutaneous microbiota goes through a turbulent period due to hormones. Then, once the adolescent crisis is over, around 20 years old, this population stabilizes. Around the age of 60, planet skin experiences a new upheaval.
Generally, in older people, the microbiota tends to increase in diversity and might be slightly more abundant. There is probably a reason for this. Bacteria like to settle in crevices, hollows, etc. And the skin of an older person is no longer as smooth and homogeneous as it can be in youth. So, they perhaps find a more favorable environment for their development.
These populations, as you can imagine, are not there by chance. Each has its mission on planet skin. But overall, the entire cutaneous microbiota forms a kind of a second skin.
Ce microbiote, c'est la première barrière, c'est la première protection de la peau.
This microbiota is the first barrier, the first protection of the skin. It is extremely useful for the balance of the skin in various ways. Firstly, very simply, there are bacteria often called commensals, which are those found regularly in almost everyone and which have a very low pathogenic power. These bacteria occupy ecological niches, just like in a forest or anywhere else, but viewed at a micro-environmental level. By occupying these ecological niches, they prevent pathogenic microorganisms from settling there. Furthermore, many bacteria of the cutaneous microbiota produce antibacterial molecules. Since they don't all get along well with each other, they try to eliminate competitors. As a result, they produce antibacterial peptides that inhibit regular competitors and potentially pathogens. Additionally, the presence of this extremely diverse population on the skin means that molecules produced by these bacteria penetrate the skin and the internal environment, training our immune system and thus preparing it to defend against undesirable microorganisms.
Se préparer à la défense contre des micro-organismes indésirables.
This is the case with Staphylococcus epidermidis. This bacterium protects us from potential enemies, stimulates our immune system, and that's not all. In case of injury, it also participates in wound healing. Other inhabitants of planet skin emit anti-UV filters. Others still protect us from pollution.
In the skin, you have certain bacteria that are real scavengers, capable of consuming all benzene derivatives.
Richard Martin.
All compounds like anthracene, all those molecules often associated with pollution, particularly pollution from petrochemicals, which is a major cause of these compounds. So you have to imagine that you have defenses on your skin due to bacteria capable of consuming everything.
Of course, given the population density, a question arises. How do all these microorganisms coexist? Already, bacteria, viruses, fungi, and other yeasts are not loners. They live in communities and communicate with each other.
Quelquefois, il y a de la collaboration.
Sometimes there's collaboration. Let's go back to Cutibacterium acnes we were talking about earlier. They used to be called Propionibacterium because they fed on C3, or basically glycerol to spare the details. And all the derivatives of glycerol, well, they fed on them. And then the fatty acids that were linked to this glycerol, they fed them to a yeast fungus that is well known today. And this yeast fungus made a feast out of it. So it was quite a formidable partnership of wrongdoers. But there was also war as well.
Et puis il y a la guerre aussi.
Yes, the inhabitants of the skin microbiota form a community. And as in any community, its inhabitants sometimes pick fights. And you know what? The climate becomes insurrectional. When a group, a species, tries to take power, to conquer the whole planet. We also observe the same behavioral shifts in the plant kingdom.
Si vous avez un champ de colza, eh bien,
If you have a field of rapeseed, well, each rapeseed plant competes with the next plant, its neighboring plant. They are in competition. Why? Because they have the same metabolism. It's the same genus, same species, often even the same individuals, since clonal seeds are offered to the public. Well, these rapeseeds will draw from the soil all the ingredients necessary for their growth. But at the same time, they will leave a lot of things behind. This means that a rapeseed field is highly contaminable, since any seed or dust that will contaminate that soil can benefit from the leftovers, so to speak, of these rapeseeds' diet. And if you imagine the opposite, these kind of flowered meadows, well, they are highly stable from one year to the next. You find your flowered meadow again and again, because it's not contaminable, or rather it's already contaminated in the right balance.
Parce que ce n'est pas contaminable, c'est déjà contaminé.
To live in peace, the skin microbiota needs, like any society, diversity. On planet Skin, respecting one's neighbor, even if they don't belong to the same family, guarantees a serene climate, meaning healthy skin without redness, without pimples, without irritation. Fortunately, the skin acts as the police, regulating the number of inhabitants and this famous diversity.
S'il y a trop d'une
If there's
bactérie,
too much of one bacterium, well, then the skin produces what we call AMPs, or antimicrobial peptides. And the role of these AMPs is to attach to specific areas of the wall or membrane of these bacteria, and then to make holes. That's what we call cell lysis. It deflates like a flat tire. So these are very powerful tools.
et donc c'est des outils très puissants.
What can we do to ensure that these microscopic inhabitants live in peace on planet Skin? For example, is our obsession with hygiene detrimental? More simply, does taking a shower every day decimate a significant part of our skin microbiota? The question may seem trivial, but it's not that simple. A researcher has investigated.
Quand un chirurgien se lave les mains avec un protocole qui dure...
Think of a surgeon who washes their hands with an extremely strict protocol that lasts about 10 minutes, completely removing lipids from the skin, and then immediately puts on gloves to operate. Does this treatment eliminate all bacteria from the skin? And if yes, do they regenerate? And if they regenerate, how long does it take? And do we find the same bacteria as before or not? So the research set out to answer these questions, and the findings were published affirming this regeneration of bacteria. And the question of how long does it take? Well, it depends on the individual, but on average, it's between 2.5 to 4 hours. You regenerate exactly your own microbiota in quality and quantity.
Vous reconstituez exactement votre propre microbiote en qualité et quantité.
Our second skin remains faithful to its duty. Provided, however, we eat a balanced diet, regularly engage in physical activity, protect oneself from stress, in short, live a healthy lifestyle. As for how pollution disrupts the inhabitants of the skin, things are not yet very clear. But research on the skin microbiota is in full swing. Recently, a new family of inhabitants of planet Skin has indeed been discovered. The Archaea.
Alors là, c'est un monde
Marc Feuillolet.
dans lequel on a...
Well, the only way we have been able to identify them was through DNA analysis of the microorganisms present on the skin, what we call NGS techniques, high-speed DNA sequencing. Archaea. We usually think of them in sulfur sources at the bottom of the oceans, in the soil, etc. And we realized that there is one on the skin. We don't really have an idea of why they are there. However, there is an article, a study, showing that there are differences in archaeal populations depending on the skin's hydration levels. So, for example, we find halophilic archaea, which means they like salt. There is salt in sweat, so they can find an environment they like. But there are also telluric archaea that, at first glance, are totally unsuited to the skin that we find them on.
Incongru à premier abord sur la peau qu'on va retrouver aussi.
So, archaea, friend or enemy of our skin? Neither one nor the other. Like all microorganisms, none are inherently good or bad. It all depends on the circumstances. And once again, the key is diversity. Find our podcast Planet Skin on all listening platforms on YouTube and on the website codif-tn.com.